Crossley, Chair of the Committee, and Councilor at Large from Ward 5, and I'm joined at the beginning of the meeting in the room by President Susan Albright at Large from Ward 2, Ward Councilor Holly Ryan, Ward 8, Councilor at Large Allison Leary, Ward 1, and then online I see we have, do we have another member of the zoning? Pam Wright, Councilor at Large from Ward 3, who's on the committee. And that's all I see at the start of the meeting. So if folks come in later, I will recognize them. In addition, we are joined tonight by Co-Director of Sustainability, Ann Berwick. Councilor Andrea Kelly has joined us, not on the committee, but great to have you. And Attorney Andrew Lee from the City Law Department has joined us. And I see a number of other people have signed up probably to speak. So I'm just going to open this. The item number is 94-23, which is, I guess I'll list the councilors, myself, Councilor Lipoff, Downs, Humphrey, Laredo, Norton, Malachy, Bowman, Danberg, Wright, Ryan, Leary, Albright, Greenberg, Kelly, Oliver, and Markowitz all wanted to pursue this issue, requesting a discussion with the Sustainability Director on the requirements under the Municipal Fossil Fuel Free Building Construction and Renovation Demonstration Project, also known as the 10 Communities Program, which would allow Newton to require electrification of all new building construction and substantial renovations, and to consider adopting such an ordinance. Now, we've been talking about this for a very long time. I see we've just been joined by Councilor Gentile at Large from Ward 4. We've been talking about this for a very long time. I'm just going to take a minute or two to talk about the process we've engaged in and what's ahead of us. And then I'm going to recognize Co-Director of Sustainability, Ann Berwick, to describe the particulars, particularly the draft ordinance that is before us tonight. So there's a regulatory framework that the Department of Energy Resources has put forward, and it changed somewhat recently, maybe a month or so ago, to tell us not only do we need to hold a public hearing, which we're doing, we would do anyway in Newton, but now we don't have to approve the ordinance before we submit it to them for their approval. So most of the ordinance is written according to a model ordinance that they have provided, which, as I said, Ms. Berwick will describe. At first, they were requiring us to actually adopt the ordinance before the submission is due September 1st. But now we would like to know if they're going to approve it, so we're going to submit it early to make sure that the several things we have in there that are not part of the model ordinance, specifically what we may exempt and a waiver provision that's been written, see if those will fly. But then our submission on September 1st has to include our draft ordinance. We do not intend to adopt it beforehand. Assuming DOER does approve it, probably in the fall, thunder's happening, I hope you can all hear, then we have until the following year to actually adopt the ordinance. That's actually good for us for because of another change they made to these regulations, to the regulatory framework, which is earlier, we were going to have to comply with the affordable housing requirements that allow us to participate in this program by September 1st. Now, that is changed. We do not have to be in compliance with their affordable housing requirements until February of 2024. That's good news for us, as we're we're very close, but not quite, and things are moving slowly, at the 10% threshold required by Chapter 40B, and that's one way we could meet compliance. The other way we can meet compliance is by complying with the MBTA Communities Act, which we intend to do by the end of the year. So that gives us a little relief and a little time to take a breath. The other reason is that we're not making the specialized code effective in Newton until January of 2024. And Ms. Berwick will explain the relationship, I believe, between these two things, but it makes sense to have them hit the ground at the same time. So tonight's public hearing is to hear from you, the public, because we in the Zoning and Planning Committee and in the City Council have been discussing this for a very long time. And we have seen this ordinance, and we have seen the list of exemptions that either the state requires or we would like to allow. And we have seen the waiver provision, which will all be explained this evening. I do want to say that to notice this meeting, it went out in the usual way in compliance with state law, but we also sent emails to every building professional who has engaged either with the Inspectional Services Department or the Planning Department over the years, sort of a list of building professionals that we have, and Leora Silks and our city clerk, Jacqueline Norton, who is with us this evening, our committee clerk, sent those out. And it's something over 200 people. So without further ado, I just want to say we do have one in-person attendee in the audience here tonight, but many of you online. So Ms. Berwick, I see that you're with us. Would you like to begin? And you'll need to, yeah, unmute. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Can everybody hear me all right? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I will be brief since I think most of you have heard all about this before, and then you can just ask me whatever questions you'd like. So this all started actually years back when Newton and a handful or two of other communities submitted home rule petitions to the legislature asking to be allowed to require that all new construction, major renovations be all electric. That requires home rule authority for cities and towns to actually impose that requirement on new construction, major renovations. So so the legislature never actually granted any of those home rule petitions. What it did instead was it passed some fairly far-reaching climate legislation that said that 10 communities, in fact, the first 10 communities to file home rule petitions of this nature would be allowed to require new construction, major renovations to be all electric, and Newton was one of the first 10. There are now 10 plus a handful of other communities, including Boston, by the way, that would like to be included to be allowed to require new construction to be all electric. So that's how Newton got into this program. We were one of the first 10 to submit home rule petitions. And now there is a DOER model rule that the would-be 10 communities are supposed to adopt if they want to participate in the program. The model rule is clear in certain respects. For example, labs and medical offices and hospitals have to be exempted from the 10 communities program. But it is unclear in certain other respects. For example, these are the most important examples. We know from DOER that cities and towns are allowed to exempt from their ordinances or bylaws certain they're allowed to include certain exemptions, but apart from the hospitals and labs and medical offices, DOER doesn't say what those exemptions might be. And we're also allowed to include a waiver provision, but once again, the model rule doesn't say what an acceptable waiver provision might look like. So there we are. We Newton, do have a list of exemptions in our in the current version of our proposed electrification ordinance. And I'm happy to go through those. There are things like, well, I won't go through them right now. I think it's reasonably clear that DOER will allow those exemptions. What we really don't know is what kind of waiver provision will be acceptable to DOER, and I can go into that in more detail if people would like. So as Councillor Crossley has said, we have to submit certain materials to DOER by September 1st of this year. We can do that, but the actual final approved by the city council version of the ordinance, that doesn't have to be submitted until next year. And so my pretty strong recommendation is that we put what we want in the exemptions and waiver provisions, and then we will see, by virtue of what DOER approves, both in terms of our proposed ordinance and other communities' proposed ordinances and bylaws, we'll see what's acceptable. And that's a reason to get materials in proposed ordinance rather early, even though the final version, the final version as finalized by the city council, approved by the city council, doesn't have to happen until July of next year. So maybe what I should do is stop there, other than to say, Councilor Crossley said I would say something about the relationship of the 10 communities program to specialized code. So Newton did adopt the specialized code some months ago. And the relationship is this: the specialized code has certain provisions allowing buildings to make use of a fossil fuel pathway, as long as they meet certain other requirements in the specialized code. If you're one of the 10 communities, then you no longer have available to you the fossil fuel pathways in the specialized code. So a piece of the specialized code gets deleted, essentially. And that's the relationship of the 10 communities program and the specialized code. So why don't I stop there? And then if I've been unclear about something, or people have additional issues they'd like me to address, I'm happy to do that.
Well, Ms. Berwick, actually, for the sake of the public hearing and folks who may not be as familiar with the ordinance, I think it might be useful to list the exemptions, those which are required by the state, and then the ones we wanted to put in there. So there's what we may do,
yeah,
and what we must do.
Yes. So let me I'll just read them. So what we must do, as a matter of state statute, the same statute that created the 10 communities program, includes some provisions that we have to adopt. So those provisions are: we have to exempt research labs, hospitals, and medical offices. Those are the only required exemptions as a matter of state law. And then we have proposed certain other exemptions, and I can just read them to you. They're not very lengthy. Freestanding outdoor cooking appliances and freestanding outdoor heating appliances that aren't connected to the building's natural gas or propane infrastructure. Emergency generators. And this is the longest one: appliances to produce potable or domestic hot water from centralized water systems, hot water systems in commercial buildings with a gross floor area of at least 10,000 square feet, provided that the architect, engineer, or general contractor on the project certifies by affidavit that no commercially available electric hot water heater exists that could meet the required hot water demand for less than 150% of the installation cost compared to a conventional fossil fuel hot water system. So essentially it's hospitals, medical offices, labs, freestanding outdoor cooking and heating appliances, emergency generators, and domestic hot water in large commercial buildings. Those are the exemptions, some required, some proposed. I'm pretty confident, I don't know. I'm optimistic that DOER will approve those. For the waiver provision, what we currently have in our draft ordinance, and to my knowledge, we're the only city that has a waiver, city or town that has a waiver provision that looks like this, and I've seen a number of others. The waiver provision as currently drafted says the city will entertain waiver requests for major renovation projects with respect to which an architect, engineer, or general contractor on the project certifies by affidavit that compliance with the requirements of the ordinance will increase the cost of the project by 50% compared to the cost of complying only with the requirements of the applicable, that's residential or commercial, specialized building code. So the idea was ISD was concerned, and I think with very good reason, about the burden that would be placed on ISD in deciding whether or not to grant waivers if we had a very subjective standard. For example, Lexington and Brookline, and I think a number of other communities of the 10, haven't their waiver provision says undue expense or unsurmountable obstacles. And so ISD was very concerned, for obvious reasons, that that kind of subjective standard would be really very difficult for ISD to implement. And so what we've done is come up with a, just check the box kind of standard. I mean, my recommendation is if the city council likes it, we should submit it to DOER, and we will know by DOER's giving us a thumbs up or thumbs down, and by what DOER says about other communities' waiver provisions, what will fly. And then we have, months to change our own waiver provision if we're required to. So, Councilor Crossley, did you want me to say anything more about those issues?
No, that's a great start. I think that was just very helpful for folks who, haven't been following closely, as often happens. Just so that people know, our job tonight as city councilors, in addition to hearing from you, is to decide whether this is the version we want to submit to DOER on a preliminary basis. It would be preliminary, which would allow Ms. Berwick to submit it anytime she's ready, beginning after tonight. And we're leaving the public hearing open until the fall, so that once we get approval from DOER, assuming we will reopen the public hearing and decide at that point if and when we want to adopt the ordinance. I will say, as you can tell from the long list of councilors who put their name on this docket item, it doesn't mean that we all support the same thing in the same version, but there's a lot of interest in participating in this pilot program. So with that, I'm going to open the public hearing. There's one person in the audience. I'm going to assume you want to speak. And if folks online, there might be questions for clarification. I see Councilor Baker, who has joined us, has his hand up. But if folks online could just raise your hand if you'd like to speak to this item, or just give me an idea of how many folks we have. Could you raise your electronic hand or your actual hand, or both? Peter, you can't count as two. Okay, really not that many, so I'm gonna just say, we'll give folks up to 3 minutes. I bet you don't need that much time, but it doesn't look like there's that many folks here who are planning to speak, at least not yet. Counselor Baker, do you have a question before we begin the hearing?
Yes, I thought Ms. Berwick's explanation was very helpful. It just, again, for the public, it might be useful. My memory, and maybe it's the stretch code, has the exemption for historic properties and not the 10 communities. But I remember there was an exemption for historic properties in one of the versions of things we've been talking about. And then the other, she indicated that if the 10 communities approach is accepted, the exemption for natural gas that's in the stretch code will go away, and it may be useful for people to understand both of those things if they're not clear to everybody already.
So
But
I didn't hear the second one. I'm not sure if Ms. Berwick did. The first one is about how do our historic properties treated in the ordinance and in the code? Because I think it is in the code, but that's okay. And the second question, Councilor Baker, was?
I would say that if the 10 communities approach is adopted, there is a provision of the stretch code, the current stretch code, that exempts some natural gas opportunities, but those would go away. And it just may be important for people to understand what goes away. It's not part of this ordinance, but it's collateral.
Yes.
Those are two clarifications.
It probably bears repeating, but Ms. Berwick did include that near the end of her presentation. The fact that go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, so let me go back to, thank you, Councilor Baker. So I'll take the second question first. So Newton has adopted the specialized code, which sort of supplants now the stretch code. And the specialized code, so putting aside for a moment, 10 communities program, Newton adopted the specialized code, and it has certain fossil fuel pathways. That is, you can comply with the specialized code even if you're using fossil fuels, so long as you do certain other things, like really, really insulate heavily, for example. What the 10 communities program does relative to the specialized code is to say, essentially to say there's a specialized code for the 10 communities. If you're one of the 10 communities, you can use the specialized code, but you can't use any of the fossil fuel pathways in the specialized code. Okay, is that clear?
Yeah, I think that's important for people to understand. And then if you just clarify the historic piece, then I'm done.
Yeah, I'm not sure I recall exactly the historic piece, I think, and Councilor Crossley, you may be better able than I am to do this, but my memory is that, and so this is not a 10 again, this isn't a 10 communities program issue, it's a specialized code issue. And my memory is that the specialized code exempts historic buildings, but not not just historic districts writ large. Councilor Crossley, is that your memory also?
Yes, it's specific to the building, and in fact, there's some language in there that it has to be found that the energy efficiency retrofits, upgrades, whatever, to the building would be damaging to the historic fabric of the building. And so it applies to historically significant buildings, but it would be taken on a case-by-case basis, and it would involve both the professional architect or whomever the property owner is hired to do the building and the historic commission. And so with...
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
And importantly, it's not a 10 communities program issue. It's a specialized code issue. And the city's already adopted the specialized.
And it's a stretch code issue as well.
That is not affected by the 10 communities. I just want to be clear on that, as I understand it. As opposed to the gas pipeline. Okay.
Right.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, so folks understand that. And so the preservation of historic properties sometimes will trump what the stretch code or specialized code requires if it's determined that it will harm the fabric of the historic building. And that's just true across the board. So 10 Communities doesn't have anything more to do with that. Okay, thank you, Councilor Baker. And I suppose I will recognize the person who is in the room first. If you would come up to the podium, if you would make sure that the green light is on so we can hear you through the microphone and people online will hear you. And then if you would please state your name and address for the record, and please try to keep it to 3 minutes. Is it on? No. Okay, do you see a green light, a button to push to turn the microphone on? There you go.
Erwin Youngrise.
Whoa. Okay.
Erwin Youngrise, 31 Norwood Ave in Newton Center. First, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. There's an assumption in all of what we're talking about here that electrification of buildings is going to reduce greenhouse gases and is going to be good for the environment. And that might be true someday in the distant future, but it's not true now. And I think we need to rethink that assumption when you consider the full life cycle. If we don't heat our homes with gas, we're going to do it with electricity from the grid. And right now, the grid is getting a lot of its energy from fossil fuels. Heating homes with electricity is going to put more demand on the grid. As people switch to electric cars, charging those cars is going to put even more demand on the grid. And so we have to ask, realistically, when are we going to stop using fossil fuels for the grid? And the answer is not for a long time. Using solar and wind and battery or other backups to deal with the intermittency requires a very substantial amount of resources, metals, minerals, and so on. Getting enough to fully switch to solar and wind will require at least 10 times as much mining of those materials as is happening now. That's just not going to happen by 2030. It's not going to happen by 2040. So at the moment, if we switch to using electricity to heat our homes instead of gas, the net result is going to be worse for the environment. And we need to rethink this and wait until we can foresee the grid really being green, really being solar and wind, before we switch and stop using gas for heating our homes. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your comment. We are very aware of how large the challenge is that is before us. Because we don't have a whole lot of people signed up to speak, I'm going to ask if Ms. Berwick would comment, because she has done, not going to do it back and forth, but I'm going to ask if she will comment on the status of the grid and the expectations for it. She's done a lot of research and written fairly extensively on this, which materials are available. So I'm going to let her take the first pass at where we stand. Ms. Berwick?
Yeah, I really, really appreciate this comment. And the issue of raw materials obviously is not a simple one. But I will say that I think there are a number of respects in which this comment, although I understand totally, why people might think it's correct in certain major respects. I think it is based fundamentally on some misunderstandings. First of all, using heat pumps, regardless, I'm talking about the electric grid the way it is currently powered, which is and I won't dispute that it is currently powered by a third or 40% by natural gas, so by fossil fuels. That is correct. Nonetheless, even the way the grid is currently powered, heat pumps for heating and cooling are so much more efficient than the conventional ways that we use, the conventional mechanisms we use for heating and cooling. Same for hot water, by the way, that we simply do save greenhouse gases, even with the current, even, I really want to stress that, even with the current situation as to how the electric grid is powered. Now, I want to add to that is we're not staying with the way the electric grid is currently powered. Just a couple of weeks ago, Governor Healy announced that her intention is for offshore wind. Okay, so not solar, not onshore, just solely offshore wind will supply a half of the state's electricity demand by 2040. Half of the state's electricity demand from offshore wind by 2040. So the grid isn't staying with its current constitution, or isn't staying the way it is currently powered. It is going to get much cleaner by virtue of solar, by virtue of offshore wind, by virtue of some limited amounts of onshore wind, by virtue of hydro, by virtue of large hydro from Canada, some of which has been approved, not all of it. So I have no question that it is in fact cleaner now and will be cleaner by larger and larger amounts to use electricity than to use fossil fuels for transportation, for heating, for cooling, for hot water, for clothes drying, for all those things we do. Is all this going to be simple? No. The country needs huge improvements in transmission infrastructure. The issue of raw materials is not an insignificant one. But Newton's not doing all of this on our own. The whole country, I mean, hopefully well beyond the country, is involved in making this transition. And yeah, well, I'll stop there. I could keep going, but.
Thank you very much. If you're interested in looking back at some of our meetings, or if you want us to help you find it, Ms. Berwick's papers on this and the resources she used to research it are available on the city website. But we understand. Sorry?
Could I say one more thing about this?
Sure.
So I've had extensive conversations with ISO New England about these issues. And, ISO New England is the organization that runs the New England electric grid. We don't have a Newton or a Massachusetts electric grid. It's regional. And ISO New England emphasizes that we need huge amounts of offshore wind, and we have to get it. And it's not just about climate change or greenhouse gas emissions. It is, in fact, about the reliability of the electric grid, because increasingly, as we have closed coal facilities, oil facilities, and are closing natural gas facilities and nuclear facilities, something has to replace them for reliability purposes. And what ISO New England is looking at what those resources will be. It's going to be offshore wind in this part of the country. Other parts of the country have other resources, right? The Northwest has large amounts of hydro, the Southwest and the Southeast larger amounts of solar than we do, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. I'm thinking we should go on with the public hearing, but Councillor Leary, did you have something?
I just, for the sake of the public, I would ask Ms. Berwick if she could explain what ISO New England is. Maybe everybody doesn't know what that is. And my second point was Mr. Youngrise's comments. could be explored further, and I've heard a lot of those comments from my constituents. And I also wasn't mentioned was the importance of efficiency and tight building envelopes and battery storage and all that kind of stuff.
Right, which isn't what this item is
yeah.
about, but it is, you know, we're dovetailing with other efforts in the city to, in fact, improve our building stock to make it more energy efficient, including the existing building stock. So new codes that apply to both new construction and major renovation, participation in the 10 Communities Act, and then we have something called BERDO, which is a reporting, an emissions reporting requirement for large commercial buildings that we're developing an ordinance modeled on what Boston is doing. It's reporting it first, and then it will be requiring existing buildings to show emissions reductions over, a few decades. So it's a mix of efforts. We're not the only community who are doing this, but it's all new stuff. It's all a lot of work, and we're trying to put it all together as a package.
If I may, we're also very proud that we get such a high amount of our electricity from renewable sources.
In our city.
In our city, yes.
But I think I really do want to get to, there's only 2 hands raised, at least so far.
But could I ask Ms. Berwick to just describe ISO New England for the
Oh, I forgot, so thank
public,
you.
yeah.
Who are ISO New England?
Yeah, ISO New England is ISO New England. It stands for Independent System Operator. So federal law, not state law, but federal law creates a number of these nonprofit entities, like I think there are 7 or 8, mostly regional, although Texas and California, I guess, have their own independent system operators. But anyway, there are a handful and a half of ISOs, independent system operators, created by federal law across the country to operate regional electric grids. And ours is a New England grid.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have 3 hands up from the public now. I'll take them in order. Mr. Anthony Trace, please repeat it so we get it right.
Trace, correct. Did you get that? Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. And your address, please.
I live at 34 Old England Road. Okay. My wife and I have done a couple of developments in restoring historic houses. My issue with the program is, the question is who benefits and who pays? Apparently it will need to exceed 150% of the cost of an alternative, which I suppose would be a more traditional fossil fuel system. So that means I think what we're asking either the developers or the homeowners, ultimately whoever's living or renting in the house or structure, to pay more money, not as a tax, but that particular individual apparently is being asked or forced to pay more money. And the benefit, as far as I can understand, accrues to not, say, like in the sidewalk ordinance where you have to put in a new sidewalk. At least you benefit your neighbors. In this case, what we're asking is somebody to pay $10,000 to $20,000 to $30,000, an individual, and the beneficiaries of this are spread throughout the entire planet. That, to me, just seems a little anti-democratic and difficult to swallow. And that's all I got to say.
Well, thank you, Mr. Trace. And I'm going to go to the very next speaker, who is a member of the Building Standards Committee of Green Newton. I know there's a lot of members of that entity. Many are building professionals who have direct experience in using this all-electric equipment and building to higher standards. So Mr. Barrow, I'm sure you already had prepared remarks, but if you can address, if you can't, we'll try to do it another way. But if you can address some of what we've learned about the building owner and what the benefits are to the building owner and the residents and so forth of buildings that are improved to use less energy.
Sure, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm Peter Barrow. I live at 60 Endicott Street. And my remarks are going to be very brief. I was just going to say I completely support this effort. I'm very happy it's getting to this point, and I'm very happy that Newton is one of the 10 communities that can set the example for the rest of the state. And I'm very happy that it's moving forward the way it is. I'll try to answer your question. Our experience is that the cost, when you're talking about new construction, the cost of electrifying instead of traditional fossil fuels is very, very small, and or negligible. There's, if you don't have to hook up any gas piping, you've saved a lot of cost. And if the building is very tight, which is the case for all new construction because of the other aspects of the codes, the cost of electric heating equipment, heat pumps, is also very small. So that the penalty is not really 50%. I believe that penalty is only in there as an unusual, to cover an unusual kind of case where, and I can't imagine what it is, but perhaps there is one, where it actually is very expensive. Because in our experience, new construction, electrification costs a negligible amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. I should acknowledge, however, that this applies to major renovations, which are clearly described in our ordinance, but it's really taken from the state code so that it's readable for everybody. So that's what we imagine. There could be a case where a major renovation, 50% of the floor area or living area of a building is or more is rehabilitated, and for some reason they don't need to replace the heating system in order to do that. That would be the situation where, if you don't need to replace it at all, then your cost for the system would be zero, or it would be whatever the cost of the new system is. But it does apply to the whole renovation. So more cost, what we're hearing, what we understand is that if you're doing a major renovation of an older building and you say you work on historic structures, or at least old significant structures, there's a lot of cost to begin with to renovate those structures, rehabilitate those structures. The new energy codes are adding cost to that. And as we said earlier, if it's considered a significant historic structure, there are waivers built into the building code and the energy code under those circumstances.
I should just, if I may, Councilor Crossley, I should just clarify one thing about the waiver provision in the current draft ordinance, which is that it only applies to major renovations and not to new construction. The theory being that it's absolutely straightforward in the situation of new construction. And as Mr. Barrow said, rarely more than a negligible amount more expensive to construct with only electric infrastructure.
Thank you. You said that more clearly than I did. Next is Dan Rubin.
Thank you, Councilor Crossley. I'm the chair of the Green Newton Building Standards Committee. My main message is this is not that big of a stretch to adopt this proposal. We'd be just one of 10 communities in Massachusetts to do so, and various communities, particularly some large cities around the country, are doing this. This is not putting us in a unique position at all. The Building Standards Committee was formed in 2018. We have worked with developers of about 15 large multifamily housing projects in Newton and mixed-use developments in Newton. When we started, and what we do is we ask the developers to adhere to our 4 principles. Electrification is one of those 4 principles. And we say, we won't support you unless you adhere to our 4 principles. I had assumed that we would get a lot of pushback around electrification. In 2018, 2019, people would say, well, we haven't thought about it, we'll study it. And they all came back months later and said, yeah, we'll do it. We don't even have to ask the question anymore. They say, of course, we're going to be all electric. Of the 15 or so developments, all 15 are using heat pumps for heat exclusively, no fossil fuel. 14 of the 15 are using all electric hot water, and the one that isn't is a smaller project. All 15 are using electricity for residential cooking. The only pushback we get is for restaurants. And I believe that'll go away in a few years as induction stoves become more popular. But that's the only pushback we've been getting. So I just don't see much resistance. Electricity it's the way the world is going. We will see in short time more and more communities, more and more cities, more and more states moving in this direction, because it's one of those things that is absolutely necessary to tackle climate change, both because it's much more energy efficient and because it could be powered by renewable energy. So, and just one more point in response to the question of who pays, one answer to that question is it's fossil fuel that causes all of us to pay, particularly the young people who will be living into the latter part of the century, because it's fossil fuel that fuels fires and floods and sea level rise. Thank you.
I wonder if I could just add one thing.
Sure.
As Dan Rubin just commented, there are a number of cities and towns who have gone the electrification route. Also, New York State, the state itself, now requires that all new construction and major renovation be all electric. And some of the other cities that have imposed this requirement are Washington, D.C. and San Francisco.
Thank you. Before I go to the next speaker, I should have recognized we were joined a little bit ago by Councilor Vicki Danberg, Chair of the committee, and Ward Councilors Emily Norton and Maria Greenberg. Next speaker is Mary Lee Belleville.
Thank you. Mary Lee Belleville, 136 Warren Street. And I'm not going to comment on the merits of the petition or whatever the right word is, because I'm still trying to decide how I feel about it. But I will comment on the fact that this is a pretty big decision. And there are 30 participants in this public hearing. And to me, that is indicative of the challenges of getting engagement with vis-a-vis these public hearings. Because I think we've heard 2 people comment, and I think one had his hand up right after me, but maybe he's dropped it, who have just raised some questions. But it's one of these things that's before the city council that people just are not aware of. And we need to find a better way to make sure people are aware and engaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Belleville. Indeed, we don't get the entire city to come out to our public meetings. I mentioned earlier how this was sent to all building professionals we know in the community through the lists that we have. It's been advertised in the mayor's newsletter, which is goes to 35,000 people and has an open rate of 65%, which is pretty amazing. It also has been advertised, I neglected to say at the beginning, several times by the Newton Needham Chamber of Commerce, so it goes to property owners and business owners who participate in the chamber, who have also held sessions on Birdo and the stretch code and electrification for their members. And when they advertise to their members, they get a pretty small, they get a showing, but it's relative to the number of members they have, which is many, many. It's a small showing, and people can choose not to participate if they wish. And again, I want to just make sure everyone hears, because we're not making this decision tonight. We are making a decision as to whether to send this draft ordinance to DOER to see if they are inclined to approve it. And if they are, and I said we're holding this public hearing open, we will go to the fall. I've already spoken with Ms. Silks and the sustainability team. We will re-advertise the hearing and open it up, at whatever point they give us the green light, and then decide whether we're going to adopt the ordinance. So I just want to make sure everybody has that information.
And Chair Crossley, I appreciate that response. And I mean, I agree. I don't know how do we get people more engaged? But what we're doing isn't working.
Sometimes they don't want to be engaged, and that's okay. They're home with their
sometimes
families.
Sometimes they don't know how it impacts them, so they know if they should be engaged. I'm just saying there's given the number of households that we have in Newton, which is I think 33,000, give or take. The fact that we have 30 people here should inform us that maybe we need to try some other things. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Belville.
Thank you.
I don't see other hands up from the public. I want to make sure you're all happy with what's happened so far. I'm going to take a comment from, you still feel free to raise your hand if there's something you would like to say, but I'm going to recognize Councilor Leary, who's in the room and wants to add something. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 points I would make, and I appreciate Ms. Belville's comment, because I think it's very important that people know what's going on in the city and participate to the extent that they can do. My experience, one, is that people really come out in droves when there's something they're very concerned or unhappy about or completely disagree with or concerned about. I mean, the fact that there's not that many people here because people agree that we need to get off fossil fuels. It's widespread throughout the city, the high schools especially, the younger people. And also, it's not really that big a deal, this decision. It would be a big deal if we didn't do it, because a lot of this is already being done by the state under building code, even before we adopted this new stretch code. It's not a big deal. If we didn't adopt it, we'd have droves of people here, I think. And again, we have plenty more bites at the apple, and there's plenty more time for participation. But you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I don't know how much more we can do to get people more participatory in our public hearings, because frankly, I like a packed room. And I think we always get a better decision when we listen to the public. And if the public was here, they would be, I can pretty much guarantee, would be hugely in favor of this decision. This is the way we're going. It's the way the country's going. It's the way the world is going. We must get off fossil fuels.
Thank you, Councilor Leary. Again, I still don't see another member of the public, so I'm going to, do I? No? Is there a hand up? Nope. Marcia Cooper. I saw you on your square, but I didn't see your electronic hand, so please go ahead.
I just want to say bravo to Councilor Leary and to you, Councilor Crossley, and to others who are advocating, Peter Barrer and Dan Rubin and Ann Berwick, and for speaking common sense on this issue. And I agree that more people who would understand this issue would wholeheartedly support it. And I hope the council will send it along and let's go forward with it. We're in deep trouble, with climate change, smoky air recently. I won't go into all the problems, but if we don't move more forward more quickly, the problems are only going to get worse. It's up to each of us, each and every one of us, to help this move along and other steps that need to be taken to achieve the goals in Newton's Climate Action Plan. And as was said, the costs are nominal financially, but the costs not doing it are gigantic if we don't move forward. So thank you again to Councillor Leary and to Councillor Crosby, and to all those who are advocating so avidly for progress to be made in these kinds of areas. You're really making a difference, and I'm so proud of you. Thank you.
Well,
That's it.
would you write my eulogy, Ms. Cooper?
I hope that's many years.
And Allison's too. Okay, well, thank
really
you very much. That's, we're trying. So I see, before I go a second round, is there anybody else would like to speak for the first time? I do see one more hand up, but for a second time, and then I'm going to call on counselors. We are leaving the hearing open, so Mr. Trace. Mr. Trace, yeah.
Hi, I'll hold my comments if Mr. Baker wants to speak. His hand was up before mine.
Well, Mr. Baker's on the committee, so we're here to hear you, and then we'll talk.
Fine. Seems to me that if this didn't, I hear you that you believe that this does not actually cost residents more. I'm sure you believe it wholeheartedly. My experience is, and I've talked to, we actually looked at it for this project, and we couldn't make it work. And we couldn't make it work, especially because of the concern about reliability. Pretty much what we were finding was anybody who would wanted to invest in this project would also want a gas generator to back up their electricity. So that's a fairly significant extra cost. And I'll leave the rest of the questions about whether or not this is more expensive or not, but to the experts. But it seems to me you wouldn't need to have 150% cost hurdle to get over if you thought it really didn't cost more, right? You wouldn't need it. As a matter of fact, you wouldn't even need this if I believe what I'm hearing from the experts. It's more efficient. People would do it on their own. I would never build a house that didn't have foam insulation, very tight, great windows, conserve energy. But electric heat is no more beneficial than fossil fuel heat. It's just heat. The benefits are accruing to the rest of the planet, not to the citizens of this city. They just aren't. You can say that we have to lead, and maybe we do, but putting the burden on individuals you.
I wanted to let you speak again. There's obviously some difference of opinion here. The purpose of the public hearing is not to have, I mean, we don't have that many people speaking, so the Q&A is appropriate, but maybe we should take some of this offline. I mean, I know I would be happy to speak with you some more, and maybe others would as well. I know our sustainability office is always open for questions and concerns, and like the gentleman who's with us, maybe you'd like to see some of the documentation that we have amassed over really several years, because we started slowly. As city councilors, we're not all technically proficient in how heat pumps work, for example. And we did a lot of learning first in the Public Facilities Committee before we went to participate in this 10 Communities program, or actually put a home rule petition forward first. But thank you. Again, I don't see any other new hands up, but I did see that Councillor Maliki had joined us. I'm not seeing her now. Oh, wonderful. Doris Ann Sweet.
Hi, I just want to speak from the perspective of the individual. My house is 98 years old, and a few years ago, we decided to put solar on the roof, which we did, and for a long time paid nothing for electricity. We paid for the solar, we got a rebate, and you know, we had great service. And so I've proceeded from there with heat pumps, which work extremely well. I do pay a little bit of electricity for them. My hot water heater is electric. The rebates have made a huge difference. I think I got a $4,000 rebate for the heat pumps alone. It's possible for individuals to do this, and you know, it's a 95-year-old house.
All set?
All set.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sweet. Okay, anybody else? Seeing none, I will now go to Councillor Baker and then Councillor Ryan. And then Councillor Albright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think part of the benefit of this conversation would be to clarify a little more what the impact of voting yes. I understand that we are sending on to the state for consideration the draft, and we're not binding ourselves because the public hearing is held open and we can change our mind. But I think the thrust of doing something to get an approval from the state is if we somehow change our mind in the meantime about a provision, then it becomes difficult because we have to go back to the state, I assume, and get the change approved before we adopt it. So I think the more homework we can do at this stage, it'll save us time in the long run. With that in mind, I guess what I'm curious about is the impact again of the gas pipeline. I'm just using that term Frederick indicated, because to the extent that people are doing brand new construction, that's the argument from Mr. Barrett, I think is pretty straightforward, that you can design this into it. But as I think some of you know, and others may not, I live in a house that's 300 years old. It's got a gas system and a forced hot water and a gas generator. So one of the questions that I think I represent as a citizen is the question other people may be asking, which is, what if am I going to have to change my system? Ms. Sweet has indicated that you can voluntarily do that if you wish, and there are credits that have made that beneficial, and we now have someone in the city to assist people in understanding their choices about energy consumption and how to go about it. But I think because the city is so largely already built up with the existing infrastructure, what we're really asking is, what is the impact of adopting the 10 Communities program on the average homeowner who might want to think about doing something, but also has got an existing set of systems, as you pointed out, Madam Chair, which in effect are no cost to them in the sense of renovation. Now, maybe there's useful life will fail and furnaces are replaced and things like that. But the question I'm curious about, and I think we need to just clarify for the public, is what is the impact on the renovation process? What happens to somebody who, are they forced to renovate? You have to go to this. What happens if there's no gas powered generator available? What do you do about that for backup? That's a consideration that Mr. Trace has talked about. So it doesn't mean that we don't go forward with this. Ms. Cooper's eloquent about the importance for everyone of trying to do something about our dependence on fossil fuels. But I do think we owe the public an understanding of if you're an existing fossil fuel user, which most of the city's properties are, and what is the impact of this change on them? Do they just stay the way they are? Is there, in effect, a change forced on them? Is there, or is there a case where if the property turns over, there's a renovation that is going to require this? So I think if we could be clear about that in the context of 10 communities, I'm not saying in the general stretch code because we already had that decision, but you've indicated earlier that there is some aspect of the fossil fuel process that goes away with this. And I think we just need to clarify that so we can make an informed decision about whether to send this on.
Okay,
So
I'm going to, sorry, all set?
Yep.
I'm going to try and summarize that, Councillor Baker, for two reasons. One, I think there's a simple question in there, but also I'm not sure if it's here because we're hearing everyone else very clearly. The sound is good tonight. I know it isn't always, but it's been a little difficult for us to follow everything you said. So tell me if I'm getting this right. You are asking probably what is the threshold for the 10 communities program for requiring electrification under the definition of substantial renovation? Because
I'm just trying to say a property owner, first place right now, the passage of 10 communities will not force them to do electrification. It may be desirable to do, but is that clear, right?
Okay, again, I'm going to try to repeat what you said because it's a little hard to hear. Nobody, I think you're asking, is anyone being forced to change to? No. If you have an existing home in your house and you're not proposing to put at least 50% of the floor area under major renovation, or you're not proposing to add a 1,000 square foot addition or more, then you do not have to comply with all aspects of the stretch code or the 10 communities program. And that's embedded in the definition, which is written out as a long paragraph in the draft ordinance, as Ms. Berwick promised she would do, that we took from the code. So it's the same definition that's used in the stretch code. I don't think I should read it. It's just too long. But the two thresholds are, let's see if I can do this in a summary. A major renovation project means low-rise residential additions over 1,000 square feet and additions exceeding 100% of the conditioned floor area of the existing dwelling unit. Or meaning if your house is 800 square feet and you put an 801 square foot addition on it, you would trigger the stretch code and this code if we adopted it. B, additions over 20,000 square feet, this would be, I assume, commercial, and additions that exceed 100% of the conditioned floor areas of the existing building for all building use types except low-rise residential. So there's a residential threshold and a commercial threshold. Level 3 alterations, and those are defined in the code, but it's pretty much a gut renovation. It means that section of the building is out of commission during construction. It's oversimplification of how to describe it. And let's see, which exceeds 50% of the conditioned floor area. I'm not going to read the rest, but those are essentially it, and then it refers to particular codes. So, but it's in our ordinance so that people can read it. So no, the homeowners across the city of Newton are not going to be forced to do anything at all. And so, for example, Ms. Sweet said that she elected to switch out her system to heat pumps. Nobody's going to be forced to do that. People might decide it's a good idea at some point, but they're not going to be forced to do it unless they meet one of those thresholds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's helpful. I just think it's important that people understand that what we're doing here is not something that is extraordinary in the sense of existing properties, although we'd certainly all like to see a positive movement in the direction that Sweet has pointed out. But I just think it's important for people to understand what the implication of adopting or going the 10 communities process involves. That's all.
Okay.
I hope it's clear enough to be understood, even though my audio may not be as good as it should be.
Well, thank you. I think we got the gist of it, as long as you agree. So, thanks. Seeing no other hands, Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been saying for a long time that we're really running behind on this. We should have been adopted this a while ago. I know it wasn't that much up to us as a city that we have to go through this process, but
State. I'm sorry, the state.
that's what I mean.
Okay.
We have to go through the process with this because it's not up to us totally. But the amount of construction, the amount of tear downs that goes on in this city, the amount of trenches that I see dug every day to hook up to gas lines for new construction of $3 million homes, it's just disheartening. I think of how long those homes are going to be there, how long they're going to be using fossil fuels, where we should be requiring solar panels and hooked up to the electric grid, which I know does need some work, but it's just, we just keep kicking the can down the road. The big picture for me is I'm glad that which I've always done, but the last 2 election cycles, federally and statewide, I worked with a lot of young people, Sunrise, and the amount of energy and the amount of them that come out and are now making a difference in elections around the country, supporting climate change candidates is making a difference, and not just here, in other parts of the country too, because they're the ones that are going to have to pay for our mistakes. This needs to be done. It needed to be done yesterday. I hope there's some assistance because I couldn't afford it myself, but if I'm forced to do it, I hope there's some assistance. And as you said, we're not forced to do it, but if the time came to change my heating system, which it will come soon, I'm gonna go to heat pumps, and there are rebates and other things that'll help us to do that. But we seem to try and nitpick this away on cost and inconvenience, and that's what we've been doing nationwide and worldwide. We have to stop, look at the big picture, and see what's coming around the corner, and it's not good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Albright is next, and Councillor Malaki's on deck.
Thank you. Thank you. So the issue of cost that's been raised is kind of alarming to me, because the real cost is, well, last week, is it last week or this week, we had the fires in Canada, the wildfires that brought us terrible air quality in this part of the country where people were told not to go outside. We have windstorms, hurricanes, floods. The real cost is what's happening to this world, and how we have cities, Boston being one of them, is trying to figure out what we can do to protect our city from floods. And Miami is trying to figure out what are they going to do to protect that city because of floods. The ocean is encroaching on our cities. The cost is huge if we don't do this. It's already here. People in agriculture are trying to figure out how can they reimagine the way they do agriculture because of the climate change. We are in a terrible place in this world if we don't do this and do much more than this. The cost is, some people may have to pay more and some people may pay the same, but if we don't do it, the cost is much, much bigger. And certainly for our children and our grandchildren, the cost is huge. It's our survival on this planet, frankly. But Madam Chair, I have a question for you. Are you looking for a vote tonight to move this forward to?
I'm looking really for a sense of the committee to let Ms. Berwick know that we agree or not, but agree with submitting this version of the draft ordinance to DOER to see what they think.
Okay, so I'll just tell you my opinion, and I'm ready to send this forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And actually, on deck actually is Councilor Gentile. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. And so you're first.
Thank you. So every time this subject comes up, I'm like a broken record. I say the same thing. I understand the goal, but I question, because of the current condition of the grid, putting all of our eggs in one basket at this time. And I think that our first speaker tonight actually made the case with some statistics much better than I have in the past. And I appreciate the fact that he came and spoke up, because I know it's not a very popular opinion. So that's my comment. And then the only other thing is, I don't know if we can give, well, I know we can give some thought to this. But the thing that I think troubles me the most when you get into the specifics of what's being proposed is the way that we are going to treat renovations. There are a lot more smaller houses in this city than I think people realize. And, if you drive around to, all of the neighborhoods, you'll see a lot of small ranches in particular. And, that's the way that those folks that aren't as well off financially get into this city or have gotten into this city, and with the goal of down the road, adding on. And if you have 1,000 or 1,100 or 1,200 square foot ranch, and you want to put on a second floor, then you are going to be forced into complying, because you could be putting on at least 1,000 square feet to put on a second story, if because maybe you're having a family or whatever. And those are the people that can't afford any increase in costs, or they might just have reservations about the effectiveness of heat pumps and splits. Since Ms. Berwick has been around even longer than I have, in terms of involvement, she was a bit of a mentor to me when I started on the school committee. I have tremendous respect for her, and I don't challenge her. And so if I'm going to make, I don't challenge her. It's not lightly when I do challenge her. But I remember when she talked about her house in New Hampshire in extremely cold weather. Well, the effectiveness of heat pumps and splits and things like that in extremely cold weather, I have them in a property, and they just don't work as efficiently as some other sources of heat. And I don't want to debate it. I mean, I've felt it, I've witnessed it. So for that reason also, in addition to cost, some people don't want to go that route, and we're going to require them. So to say that we're not going to be forcing people, you know, to make these kinds of changes, I don't think that it's 100% accurate, just because of the stock of smaller homes that are going to fall into one of these criteria where they're going to have to fully electrify the house, because they're putting on a relatively small addition, but it still meets the criteria. So I hope that we can at least give some more thought to that. I didn't realize that we were taking action tonight, or I don't know whether, you know, if it's just a straw vote or whatever, to send this on. But whatever we do, I hope that there's an opportunity, because I heard we were keeping the public hearing open. If we're gonna send this to the legislature, I guess I'm not, it's not clear to me why we're keeping the public hearing open. So I just hope that maybe we can think about, you know, these smaller homes and forcing them to have to go in this direction. And so that we can maybe think about modifying that a little bit.
So Councillor Gentile, I just want to make sure this is clear. I'm going to repeat some of the process matters that we're confronting. We're not sending this to the legislature. We're sending the draft ordinance as a draft for a preliminary review to see if they will, if they are inclined to approve our exemptions and specifically the waiver provision.
This being, they being the legislature or the
No.
DOER?
DOER.
Right, I
No.
misspoke.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah,
Yep.
the legislature has nothing to do with us
Right.
at this point.
I
DOER gets
misspoke.
to decide whether we may participate in the program. However, I'd like to say one more quick thing, and maybe Councillor Gentile, we could further this conversation offline. The example you gave is a good one in that, you know what my profession is, and I've put second stories on small houses as an architect, and if you're doing that, you're increasing the demand load of the building substantially, and you need to redistribute your heating and cooling if you have cooling. You need a new system anyway. Your system for half the size of the house is not normally gonna serve a house that's twice or more than twice as big. And that's the kind of discussion, those are the kinds of things, I thought a lot about this too when I read this draft ordinance, and I thought, okay, who is going to really suffer from this? This, I don't think, is going to be as much of a burden on a homeowner doing that kind of a thing as the stretch code and the requirements of that, and new structural codes and new all kinds of codes are increasing the cost of construction, but maybe not as much as the construction industry itself. Ms. Berwick?
Yeah, I just would like, first of all, thank you, Councillor Gentile, for your comments. I appreciate them. I just want to address a couple of issues that are embedded in those comments. And one has to do with the reliability and effectiveness of heat pumps. Because I think there is a mythology out there that they are not that reliable. And Councillor Gentile mentioned my home in New Hampshire. Since I've referenced our heat pumps in New Hampshire, we had one evening this winter where, with the wind chill, the temperature was down to 45 below zero, with an absolute temperature of 20 below zero. Our heat pumps basically did fine. We had a couple of very small strips of baseboard heating that supplemented during the middle of the night, but we had no need for a backup system, a fossil fuel backup system. And I think that, so that's point number one. even in very cold weather, New Hampshire mountain cold weather, heat pumps work. Number two is this issue of backup and why I think it may be causing some confusion. By federal law, hospitals are required to have backup generation. It has nothing to do with electrification, right? They have to, even if they're fossil fuel generated, which they generally, or fossil fuel resourced, which they generally are, they have backup oil generation. So that's a matter of federal law, has nothing to do whatsoever with electrification. The fact that we are talking about backups is not a function of some reliability issue related to heat pumps. In general, heat pumps do just fine. And the folks who are required to have backup are hospitals, and well, one can well understand that. And it's not a function of electrification.
Ms. Berwick, we're losing
Just
you.
a question of redundancy.
Ms. Berwick, you might need to turn off your video because your sound is breaking up. We lost the last sentence.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, well, all I was saying is I don't want to there's been a number of references, including my own with respect to exemptions, to backup. And the backup issue mainly has to do with redundancy in certain uses like hospitals, has nothing to do, and that has to do with redundancy in non-electric systems, right? Hospitals that are not essentially powered by electricity are required to have redundant systems. There is, but nobody is arguing, or I certainly would not argue, let me put it that way, that there is a need for redundant systems, such as a backup generator, if you're using a heat pump. And that has been my experience in the mountains in New Hampshire. Certainly, and I have heat pumps in the room I'm sitting in right now, certainly no backup here.
So, Madam Chair, if I could just finish up.
Go ahead.
Again, with all I was saying, my experience is different than Ms. Berwick's. I have heat pumps in a property that I own, and they just don't work as well in colder weather as as more traditional heat. That's my experience. Anne has a different experience. I'm not questioning that she's not having the experience. It's just that people have different experience with this regard. I'm not talking about backups. What I'm saying with some of these smaller homes, I add to you, Madam Chair, is I understand that you may have to, replace the system, or you more than likely will have to replace the system. But there are some people, because they've had a similar experience, or, somebody else has laid out some different options to them, that they would prefer to have, an extremely high efficiency gas system as opposed to, all heat pumps or a combination. And we're going to not allow them to have that option based on the size of the addition that they're putting on. And I'm just not sure that that's something that I want to force people into, that's all.
Thank you, Councilor Gentile. I really understand your concern. I also understand it from the point of view of trying to service clients who want to do this. And, it's a time in the industry where there's better equipment and worse equipment, better performing equipment and worse performing, better contractors and worse. Which is the case with everything in construction, but, you do have to be careful, and it's also it's more difficult to find equipment that's going to satisfy your heat load if your building is leaky. If you're not also simultaneously, which these folks would be, who are doing major renovations, simultaneously tightening up the building envelope. Because if for no other reason, they'd be required to by the stretch code. But it's a good conversation to have, and I totally agree with you. It's not easy out there. I see Andrew Lee has had his hand up. Would you like to weigh in on something before I take more folks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nothing on substance, just with regards to process, because there has been questions about what is being asked of the City Council tonight, as well as the process moving forward. I think that you've answered it pretty succinctly, but I can clarify further if you'd like. I can answer it now, or I can do it at the end when everyone has spoken.
Please, go ahead. Just, it probably needs to be said a few times. Go ahead.
So one thing kind of going back, Anne had already mentioned that even to be eligible as one of the communities to participate in this program, the city had to have submitted a home rule petition already, signaling that they were interested in going in requiring electrification, and the city of Union has already done that. That's why we're one of the communities that are eligible. Now, with regards to formal, actual city council action, there's only one thing left to do to be part of the 10 communities and actually partake in the program itself, meaning actually effectuating it so that new construction and substantial renovations have to be all electric. And that is the enactment of the ordinance. That doesn't have to happen until September of 2024. In between then is where we are right now. And what we are trying to do, and by the we I'm utilizing is city staff, is getting the application materials ready to submit that include the proposed ordinance. And what we're looking for is just kind of direction, guidance with regards to city council, because it is going to be you that ultimately, enacts the ordinance itself. So it doesn't make sense to have an ordinance that the city councils have no interest in. One thing I will say about that, though, is the city has very limited say with regards to what this ordinance looks like. There's been a model ordinance that has been promulgated by DOER. They made it very clear that our ordinance has to look like that. It has to match the regulations, notwithstanding just a couple things with exceptions and exemptions I'm not going to repeat because Ann Burr will cover them very well. So tonight, we're not looking for any action, not a formal vote or even a straw vote, I believe, because there's really nothing to be voting on. The docket item is going to be held, as the public hearing is going to stay open. And just also to make clear, the regulations explicitly state that municipalities that have submitted an application are encouraged to resubmit, supplement that submittal, whether it be that DOER has denied something, rejected something, asked for clarification. And of course, we're going to get some more guidance based on what DOER does on other communities' applications as well. The point that I'm trying to make is, I highly doubt that this is going to be the only meeting that we have prior to the actual ordinance coming to the city council and ZAP for adoption. I anticipate that we're going to get feedback from DOER on the exceptions and exemptions that we are requesting. We will be reporting that information to ZAP and then looking for further guidance on what we are going to be, again, supplementing or resubmitting for our application to the DOER up until September of 2023.
Thank you, Attorney Lee. That's helpful, and we do want to have a sense of the committee. I think Ms. Berwick and you would like a sense of the committee, so we'll take, I know we can call that a straw vote, we can call it anything we want, but I think we will go around the room and make sure everybody wants to move to the next step. Yes, one more thing? No, you're all set, okay. So two more hands up, Councillor Malachy and Councillor Danberg.
Thank you. My camera wasn't on, but I was here at the beginning. And I just wanted to clarify the discussion about, I think the term was like important historic buildings, and they are exempt from the specialized stretch code. And it sounded like you all thought that was enough to cover them in this ordinance, but it seems like it's two different things, and they could be exempt under the specialized stretch code, but if they're not specifically exempted in this ordinance, the way, outdoor cooking or whatever that thing was, or emergency generators, if they're not specifically listed as something that we want to request be an exception, they wouldn't be accepted. So shouldn't we have some kind of parallel language in here that like what we have in the exemption to the specialized stretch code?
We can't, because the specialized stretch code, of course, is part of the state building code, and it's actually the stretch code itself is part of the state building code. We adopted it in whole. We are not allowed to amend the state code. We either adopt it or we don't, and we did. You're right about one thing is that this is very different from the stretch code, because the historic waiver isn't necessarily an exemption. It might be that you have to required to do certain things that the stretch code requires, but not those things which might mar the historic fabric of the building. So you would have to believe that switching to an all-electric heat pump system would somehow mar the historic fabric of the building, and the architect for the property owner and the historic commission would make a case for that. And this is how do I want to say, a summary of what's in the code, right? It's not how it's written, but there's a way to avoid, for example, if you can't put triple glazed windows on an historically significant landmarked whatever building, because they would mar the historic fabric of the building. You couldn't get something that would be like the original. And that may also apply to insulation wraps on the framing. You have to insulate it from inside so that you're not changing the exterior detail of the building. In our city, we have, the Historic Commission prevails over any buildings over a certain number of years old when there's any partial demolition. So if somebody's doing an addition or major renovation of some kind that affects the exterior that's within the public right-of-way, then they have a say. And all that holds true with any of these codes. So am I on the same page with you? Does that help?
Yeah, I think it makes sense now. So basically, it was more of a not exemption or exception, but a waiver to protect the appearance of the building. And in the case of the heat, there's always the option to put the system in the back of the building out of public view, basically, right? And it wouldn't affect any other aspect of the historic nature of the building that's visible.
There is that option, but I don't think that, this is probably another conversation. Every historic district doesn't have the same level of rules. I think Chestnut Hill is the only one that has a really deeper level of rules that might prohibit putting equipment in the side yard, for example. I don't know if it does. I know they control a lot of things, but our ordinances, for example, allow high-efficiency heating equipment within the setback. And we did that purposefully so as not to prevent people from upgrading their mechanical equipment and reducing their energy demand. So, or not energy demand, but energy use. So that's something, that's not going to apply to any home seeking a demolition permit. They're subject to the rest of our rules. It's if the stretch code would cause damage to the historic fabric of the building. That's how it reads. We have published that before in our packet, but we can try and do that again. Try and dig up that material again so you can just read the language in the code.
Okay, so basically, practically speaking, an electric system would not be at risk of impacting the historic nature of the building in the way that other energy efficiency measures like the windows might be.
Correct.
So I think I get it. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Councillor Danberg.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank everybody for all of their comments that we've heard this evening, because I think this is something that we certainly need more discussion on, for everyone to understand fully what the circumstances are, and what this change would mean, and what it would mean if we didn't do this change. And I think that that's equally as important as what the change itself will cause. I have a similar experience in the heat pumps that we have installed to Ms. Berwick, in that I live in I just did the math, and I'm shocked to realize that I live in a 160-year-old house here in Newton, of which there are many. And the installation of a heat pump and installation of solar panels has actually brought down our heating cost. We and I think a lot of people would replacing their heating systems that are 25 or 30 years old. Ours was 26 years old. It was on the verge of failure, not just because it was failing, but because its efficiency was so low in comparison to the efficiency of the new products that are out there now, the new systems, that it only made sense for us to replace it. And if you're replacing a system that needs to be replaced anyway, the cost is a wash. It is no more expensive at all to go to heat pump. In regards to, and I thank Councillor Gentile for bringing up the smaller homes that we have in Newton. My children live in a smaller home. It's under 1,100 square feet. And we also had a 25-year-old system there that needed to be replaced. And our bills have gone down. So it was a wash to replace it. And as far as cost is concerned, I'm very pleased. I understand the fear of the unknown that is out there. But as Councillor Ryan commented, and I thank her for bringing this up, we have a larger responsibility than just a few dollars one way or another in what it's going to cost us to run our systems. Boston is, as was mentioned, looking to find out what we can do or what it can do so that its downtown will not in the next 30 years be underwater. New York City is putting a 10-foot berm all along the East River to try and keep the East River out of Manhattan. In 2010, the building that one of my children was living in was flooded on the first floor. It was on FDR Drive, as were all of the buildings. We're no longer getting storms just every 100 years. The 100-year storm is now every 10 years. If you look at how many hurricanes and cyclones we're getting, we're in a changed climate already. Climate isn't just changing, it has changed. And in order to forestall even worse conditions, we have to move in this direction. I would be happy to, if you are asking for the sense of the committee, I will go down on the side of moving this forward. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Danberg. And I see that Councillor Baker, you have your hand up again, but I just want to make one point. There's a lot of dates in Ms. Berwick's memo, and the dates we've gone over a couple of times, the dates that have changed. But in here, it says, I want to make sure I'm on the same page with Attorney Lee, that the final ordinances must be submitted to the Department of Energy Resources not later than July 1st, 2024, with extensions available on a case-by-case basis. So I want to make sure that in our report, the July 1st, 2024 is the date that is recorded as the date that we must have our ordinance in place by. And Attorney Lee, there are September 1st dates for many things, but are we, I just want to make sure we're on the same page there.
Madam Chair, if that is the case and you were looking for a motion to move this forward, I move it.
No, I'm trying to correct a date. I'm trying to make sure we have the same date. We're talking about the date by which an ordinance must be passed finally is July 1st, 2024, not September 1st, 2024. Are we good
Madam,
there?
that's correct. That's the date by which the ordinance has to be adopted by the city council. The September 1st date of 2023 that I have referenced is the date by which the final application, meaning no more supplements, anything, the absolute final total application by the city has to be submitted to the DOER.
I think it was correct in the report as well. Thank you. No, we do not need a motion to vote on this. I'm just going to ask people to tell me what they think. And so, Councilor Baker, you're actually up next. Are you also ready to move this forward the next step, just so that we can get a submission?
I'm going to turn my video off and hope that the sound is better. Can you hear me okay? Is this possible? Is it coming through?
We can hear you, but the audio sounds kind of the same. It sounds just a bit muffled. So maybe if you could speak a little slower, so we don't miss your words.
Right. I'll try not to be like the slow talkers of America in Bob and Ray. You may have remembered that old skit. I'm prepared to support moving this forward. I do think it would make sense, however, before we do, if Ms. Berwick and you would just summarize the benefit to Newton from going forward, because Newton has put itself into the 10 communities situation, and part of the value, it seems to me, of this aspect is of this ordinance is to understand the benefit to the city as a whole. I wanted to get clarity about the nature of the challenges for people who are renovating, and I applaud Ms. Berwick for working on the waiver provisions, because I think that's an important safeguard for our residents for true hardship. But I think that the general policy is wise, but I think it would help everyone if he could take a minute just to say, leaving all of aside the climate issues, why Newton is in this game as opposed to other communities. And that might save a little time down the road, but that's your call and her call.
Ms. Berwick, do you want to begin? Or
Sure. Why is Newton in this game? The fact of the matter is there's legislation pending to vastly expand the number of communities that would be included in this program. There are a lot of communities that want in. So it's not just 10 who want to be pilots. It's a rather larger number of communities who want to go in this direction, because they know that down the road, and not very far down the road, they're going to have to be eliminating their use of fossil fuels. I mean, it makes zero sense to be building a new building now or making a substantial commitment to an existing building by way of major renovations or additions, when you know perfectly well that in a handful or two of years, we're not going to be wanting to use, should not be using fossil fuels at all. So we're really just creating stranded assets by building buildings that use fossil fuels. I mean, beyond that, but I would say there are a number, so that more addresses the particular benefits to building owners in Newton. But I would go sort of beyond that and say that it, behooves communities that are thinking seriously about these issues to be setting models for other cities and states. I mean, look what New York State has just done, and it's going to have a huge influence in terms of just being a model for what has to happen. But if you ask me, is Newton going to solve the world's climate change problems? Of course, the answer is no. But why do we vote? It's my vote is so unlikely to make a difference, but we do it because it's our civic duty. And I guess I would say, you're asking me for my personal opinion, I would say this is our civic duty as well.
Thank you. I don't know if I can really add to that. I do know that Newton likes to be first sometimes, and that we have a lot of people in our community who are really dedicated to improving our community and the planet. I know some folks think maybe we're small potatoes when we start talking about the planet, but we have the brain power and the resources to go forward, and we're going forward in a number of directions. Obviously, sometimes it's hard to find time to take a breath. We're doing so much work on climate action with Berto and 10 communities, and we adopt the stretch the stretch and the specialized code, et cetera, and in more ways, more ordinances that touch on this. We know that we have a climate action plan. I believe we're all in support of the climate action plan. It's implementing it that's difficult and challenging. And this is a really important piece of that. And I do think, I actually know, because I know someone in another community who has contacted Newton, who's a sustainability director for Quincy. But I know Ms. Berwick gets calls all the time from other towns who are saying, and then we get on calls with some of these groups from other towns when there are sort of coalitions of cities and towns, and I know Councilor Leary does too, where you hear what other towns and cities are doing, and they're saying, and Newton's doing this, and Newton's doing that. And so sometimes we emulate what other communities are doing. Sometimes it's the other way around, but we definitely are one of the leaders. And I think that's because of the extraordinary community that we have and the extraordinary talent that we have within our community who helps us do this.
So, Madam Chair, let me just be a little more clear than I was. Can you understand me? I just want to be.
Yeah. Yes.
Just saying is, I think what I'm hearing, and just so the public understands, by building our opportunity to get this ordinance into our ordinances, we are enhancing the chance that we will move to electrification sooner in the city. That's basically what we're talking about, as I hear it, right? Because new construction, substantial renovation will require electrification.
Yes, I think, go ahead.
That's the purpose of all this, and I think we ought to be clear that's the benefit to the city of trying to do it, as I understand it. Am I correct?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of related benefits too. I mean, we know we have 700 or 900 gas leaks across the city, for example, and we're in the midst of a horrible situation there, and as the gas companies are trying to expand the system, we would rather all the new construction, which, as I understand, across the state is only the equivalent of 1% of the built floor area each year. But if you go out 30 years, it becomes 30%. That's a no-brainer, is that our new buildings should be clean. And we do have to do something about the existing building stock too. So yes, the objective is to have a cleaner community, so that we're not smelling gas all over the place and risking explosions. Are we okay?
I'm done.
All right, thank you so much. And I see Allison Leary is next. I'm going to ask the rest of you to just let me know also where you stand.
I'll distill it down even more. Cleaner air, the sickening smell of methane gas all over the city will be reduced. We'll reduce the risk of explosions, improve public safety. We'll have quieter electric vehicles. We'll reduce pollution from oil. Anyone remember Deepwater Horizon? And spills from pipelines all over the country. The pollution and health impacts and environmental damage from fossil fuels is something I can't even calculate, but pervasive. That will all be improved. And so I think that will benefit Newton directly, but I will also say when it comes to the planet that we all depend on for life, we are all socialists. And I'm in favor of this ordinance.
Okay, thanks so much. Councilor Ryan, what's your point of view? You were in favor yesterday, and President Albright?
Well, I was in favor last week.
Okay. I think all of us who are here from the Zoning and Planning Committee would like to move this forward. So I hope that message is loud and clear for our Sustainability Co-Director and Attorney Lee. We do want to move to the next step. And I think with that, seeing no further hands up, it is not up. One more.
I'd like to make a motion to hold.
Thank you. We have a motion to hold from Councilor Leary because we don't have Councilor Krinsman. So all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And to leave the public hearing open as well.
Yes.
That's part of the motion.
Yes,
Okay.
part of the motion, keep the public hearing
Great.
open.
So all those in favor, please say aye again.
Aye.
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 Are any opposed or abstentions? No, thank you very much. I can't believe it. Zoning and Planning Committee is getting out before 9 o'clock. Right. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this evening, and more to come.